We get live right now, man. It's going down. Excited for the season. You know, we coming off a playoff win. I mean, you know, we had a couple wins.
Hey guys, this is Riley, producer and podcast host extraordinaire of Diaries. Wanted to jump in before the episode here. We were lucky enough to be joined by Tom Lewis of Indy Cornrows last night, Thursday, April 18th, to do a preview of the Pacers-Bucks series that kicks off this weekend. Unfortunately, after the recording had wrapped, I went in, listened to the audio track, and my audio in particular was really squeaky, high-pitched, kept stuttering. I think it was something wrong with my internet connection. Thankfully, Tom's audio, and then Michael, also from Brew Hoop, his audio was fine as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the best that I can to edit out my original portions. I'll jump in here after the fact to insert whatever questions I was asking to Tom prior to Tom's responses, and then I'll try to leave in Michael's as well because his audio is fine. So just wanted to give you a heads up. Apologies for the technical difficulties. Where we got started was just a very simple question to Tom, where the Pacers had been since these teams had last played each other in January, essentially just recapping the back half of the season for the Pacers, ups, downs, etc., before we got into the players and such. So thanks again for listening. I'll jump in a couple more times here as the podcast goes on, and let's go over to Tom.
Yeah, I mean, those earlier games were really a boost for the Pacers' whole season, having that success in the in-season tournament, and then having success against the team that was considered the tops in the division and in the conference, and the way Tyrese Halliburton came out of the box playing, it was somewhat magical. But as we all know, the season is so long; it's a marathon, and there's really 2 or 3 seasons within one regular season. And I know the Bucks are a different team than the Pacers played then, with a whole new coach, for one thing, and the Pacers are as well, with a lot of lineup changes, trade not really a trade deadline deal, but before the trade deadline, acquiring Pascal Siakam, moving off of Buddy Hield and Bruce Brown, and also Benedict Mathurin, who had in a couple of those 5 games, had 2 of his best games of his career, really. He is injured and out, for the season, suffering shoulder injuries. So he's been out of the rotation, and the adjustments really since the All-Star break. Tyrese Halliburton had injured a hamstring prior to the break, and really had kind of struggled to get back to 100%, and hasn't reached the point where he was during that in-season tournament run and several of those games against the Bucks earlier. But so that return from injury and also incorporating Siakam, which brings a far different dynamic to that starting unit. It has been up and down at times. The team really had dumped a lot of bad games against sub 500 teams, which kept them kind of in that 6th spot. They were really lucky to hang on to that 6th spot the way things fell. So, but as this, right at the end of the year, they did kind of adjust their rotation. They got big minutes out of T.J. McConnell. Obi Toppin has come on strong, and Halliburton has gradually started looking better, and it feels like they ended the season securing that 6th spot and should be ready to try and get the Bucks everything they have now, and hopefully the energy of the playoffs will help give them that boost. Obviously, other than Siakam, there isn't a lot of playoff experience on this team, so that's where it felt like early in the season, the Pacers were really taking it like a playoff situation, whereas the Bucks were, you kind of felt like maybe they were just like, yeah, it's still November. you know, we got time before the playoffs. We aren't going to be selling out, making big changes, and treating those games as important as the Pacers did. So it's going to be real interesting to see how they match up now um, with Game One on Sunday.
All right, so next up here, I followed up with Tom to ask about the final 2 weeks of the season. In particular, the Pacers had finished the season 7-3 compared to the Bucks 3-7 over the final 10 games. So just wanted to follow up with Tom to see, is there a particular reason why the team seemed to have been playing better? Was it particular players who were doing better? Was it the system kind of gelling at the right time? Essentially asking what to look out for. Is there somebody who's really hitting form at the right time right before the playoffs here? So just a quick follow-up question here.
Yeah, I felt like Tyrese really struggled. There was a time where he really struggled shooting the ball, and that was one issue with when they lost Buddy Hield. All of a sudden Tyrese was like the best 3-point shooter, so that altered the way defenses were approaching him, and that 3-point gravity that Hield had was gone, and that adjustment, um, you know, really was felt in his numbers. But I felt like while his numbers weren't as consistent and as big as they were early in the season, it seemed like he got his mojo back, got his feel for how he's going to be playing with this group going forward. And then the bench several times came up big. Um, in fact, there were some poor starts by that starting unit, but T.J. McConnell in particular, the last 15 games of the really more like the last 20, but he's averaging about 15 points a game, shooting over 50% from three, even though not volume shooting, but him just making a three is always a cause for celebration. And so the way he just attacks with the ball and energizes the game while he's in there was a big impact. Also, Obi Toppin kind of settled into his role off the bench and was shooting the ball well from three and attacking, and that combo of McConnell and Obi Toppin ended up providing a lot of threes and a lot of dunks for that reserve unit, which is one you know way this team has to succeed right now is with their depth. If you're taking the top five of all the teams that are contending, they're not going to match up. But when they can utilize their depth a little bit more and keep the pace up and try and run teams down, then that's where they've been succeeding.
So this is the portion here where we start getting into the players themselves. I wanted to follow up in particular about Pascal Siakam, their midseason trade acquisition. As a refresher, Buddy Hield and Bruce Brown were sent out of the team. I don't think it was part of the same deal, but essentially at the same time. And Siakam was the guy who came in to fill in, especially in that starting lineup. So it was easy at the time, the Siakam trade, to see that it was kind of accelerating Indy's win now timeline. But wanted to know how Siakam had fit in with Rick Carlisle's system and how he was just playing overall. So we move on here to Pascal Siakam and a couple of discussion about a couple of different players for the Pacers.
No, I think it definitely has been a positive impact overall. I mean, they really needed some bigger wings just for matchup purposes with almost every team, particularly, you look at Milwaukee, Boston, Orlando, Cleveland, they're oftentimes playing Aaron Nesmith, who is maybe 6'6" on a good day, as your guarding power forwards. And so having Siakam in there with his size helps on that end, but also, I mean, he is a quality offensive option. And, he's been averaging, over 20 points a game. And it's been interesting that, the Pacers they want to push pace. They have a freewheeling style where they're not really running, specific sets all the time. and they don't, they kind of had Siakam figure out how he was going to fit with them as opposed to like running a bunch of stuff that he was used um, to get him specific shots. So it has been kind of strange that they've done that at times because there'll be games where he just doesn't get a lot of shots. But there's other times when, you know, going down the stretch, he's had some, you know, 3 4 minute stretches where he'll get to his spot and he'll make that shot. And it's just such a great option to have, especially at that time when Halliburton was kind of struggling. If they can both get to the point where they're, excuse me, where they're both, rolling relatively consistently on the offensive end, it's going to be a big bonus, and that frees up, shots for around the perimeter with Myles Turner and Neesmith and those guys off the bench when they're cross matching. It's he's been a good fit and just what the type of player that this team needed going forward.
Have you noticed any specific kind of game plan shifts from Rick Carlisle? I mean, I know this is year 3. He's got a ton of playoff experience before this, particularly the 2011 run with Dallas. But kind of going off of the Pascal Siakam acquisition, did you kind of notice any particular changes in kind of the pacing of the game from Rick upon that transition?
Yeah, and I mean, for the first half of the season, they were on a historic pace offensively, which seemed crazy. And it did, settle down, and definitely that transition with the combo of the Halliburton injury and adding Siakam to the mix kind of slowed things down, but they have continued to try and stay with what they're doing. And I feel like, especially in a series like with the Bucks right now, they're going to do everything they can to continue to push the pace and play that kind of that freewheeling style where they're just continuing to read and move the ball and move the bodies around to get open looks. But the in the playoffs, that historically is really hard to accomplish. And that's something that you kind of feel like you would expect Doc Rivers and the Bucks to take their time, bring the ball up, and make sure they don't do anything to help the Pacers get that pace going. Because I know I was reading about something about the Bucks and how they've improved their transition defense quite a bit, which was a big thing. In those earlier games, the Pacers were just getting out and running, and there were some signature moments where they were literally beating players down the court even after makes to get easy buckets. And in the playoffs, you just don't expect that type of thing to happen. And so it'll be interesting to see if there are any additional wrinkles that Carlisle comes up with. I know defensively they have put a lot of effort in to this team, and there has been vast improvement. There have been fantastic games defensively, but that has not been a consistent thing that they can lean on. And so, it all depends on matchups. Of course, I'm sitting here and I think I heard Carlisle on the radio the other day, and I think everybody in India is just assuming Giannis is going to show up fully healthy on Sunday. And so, it's always just daunting to look at the matchups when he's involved. So until he's not, there's always going to be that hint of panic hanging over our heads.
So I jumped in here next to ask Tom about the defensive principles that Rick Carlisle and the Pacers play with, especially with Siakam out there instead of Hield and Brown. So this was more so to get a sense of what the base defense Indiana uses looks like, what we should look to expect in the first game, kind of the first look, and, understanding that a lot of teams switch a lot of different schemes out there. So this is about the defense of the Pacers next.
Yeah, I mean, the the switching has been, a problem because a lot of times that generally is what they're doing, and the issue with that starting lineup normally Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Neesmith, Siakam, and Turner. Um, that's four pretty good defensive players, and then Halliburton. And so, there's an obvious hunting going on. So it'll be, assuming, Nembhard on Dame, and the nice thing about having Siakam in there is that whether it's Giannis or Bobby Portis, he can guard that bigger guy, and then maybe Neesmith on Middleton isn't a perfect matchup, but they'll have to, adjust to that. But then it's okay. You got to when they're switching all the time, having having Halliburton involved in that is a struggle. So I also think at some time he will throw in a couple zone looks, and I know that they're ideally pushing these guys defensively and to play that to be able to switch all over the floor. But then again, also when you get to the bench, as I mentioned earlier, McConnell, and even Obi Toppin as a defender on the ball and all that. These guys aren't real strong, so they're relying on a lot of help, a lot of tagging and everybody being on the same page. And quite often, um, even with the starting lineup, there'll be an early timeout, and it's almost always because one person or maybe two people just didn't execute defensively as they expected, and Carlisle hit a timeout. They're down 10-2, and um, and they got to get on the same page. So it's a constant struggle, no matter what they try to do defensively. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I can certainly say that we've experienced a similar kind of burn over the course of the season. I mean, this season totally taught me that there's no team too poor offensively to get in a shootout with the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm sure you've kind of been there as well.
Yeah, it is incredible. The NBA talent, and there aren't a lot of guys in the league that can guard, stay in front of everybody. you know, and but it just gets frustrating when it's like, oh my god, even with the game, every game against the Hawks, the Pacers have been around 150, but it's like they're giving up. Carlisle was so upset after that win on Sunday because they gave up 72 in the half, even though they were up by 14 at the half. It's it's just a strange situation with that team, but that they want to play that pace, and so that makes it hard to be a grinded out defensive team when you're also hunting quick and easy buckets at the other end.
Right.
All right, this is the last player question for a little while on the podcast. I wanted to go over to Myles Turner as the big man for the Pacers, especially since outside of Jalen Smith, there's not a lot of size off the bench for Indiana. So for me, as a casual observer of the Pacers, I always like to or any team really, jump to the big man as a key component to how they're playing on both ends of the floor. Turner is no different. Spaces the floor, obviously pretty good defensively. Team's not great rebounding, even with him on the floor. So just wanted to get Tom's thoughts on Myles Turner. Sounds like it's a sort of Chris Middleton-esque situation. Some people love him. Some people, I wouldn't say loathe, but are a little bit lower on Turner than others. So just wanted to jump to Turner as one last key player to keep an eye out for here.
Yeah, there's a lot of love-hate relationships with Myles around Indy. And he really is, having one of his better seasons this year. Definitely has seemed to have matured. I think, a lot of the buzz about him being good or bad, or the inconsistency is the thing that kills you with him. There'd be games where, he's scoring less than 10 points and grabbing 4 or 5 rebounds, and it's like, what is going on? But he's been far more consistent this year and has really, I think part of his development is his approach to the game, and also playing pick and roll with Halliburton. It's gonna make anybody better, but he's been one of the best in the league, hitting the top of the key 3-pointer, and that's he's been popping out, and he just crushed the Hawks with that. Of course, they were down some big guys, but last Sunday, but he is, when he has it going, and can, get 15 to 20 points offensively, remain that, rim protector, that just frees the team up quite a bit to be much more productive elsewhere as well. So it's that combination of Halliburton, Siakam, and Turner, are really the three key guys, to keep things moving offensively. But Turner has been, obviously, a big defensive presence with his rim protection and communication. I think that's something he's improved a lot, as he's matured here. He's still relatively young vet, but he's definitely, as you kind of mentioned, the secret sauce. Yes, when he has, when he's hitting a few 3-pointers and making his presence felt for the defense to have to react to, then it's kind of like that gravity I was talking about with Buddy Hield. It's like they need that consistent gravity, because anything that draws the defense's attention creates an extra, beat or two for Halliburton to just burn someone and make a play. And that's, when they have to avert their eyes from Halliburton, then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
The 3-point shooting, I think, is a really undervalued part of Turner's game, because as far as bigs go, he's really, I mean, if you consider Pascal a big, but Jalen Smith isn't really going to provide a lot of 3-point shooting or spacing at the top of the key off the bench. So even though Turner was kind of a trade guy for a long time, I feel like he's kind of
all the time
earned a little bit of leeway in Indiana, at least for
well,
what you're trying to accomplish right now.
We had several years of Turner or Sabonis or Turner. And, it was became a nauseating debate, and it seems to have worked out pretty well when they were able to get Halliburton for Sabonis. So,
yeah.
Now I'm going to ask Tom to don a Bucks coach's blazer and become Doc Rivers for a minute to think up ways that he thinks the Bucks coaching staff should game plan against the Pacers. How have teams been game planning against them throughout the season? Weaknesses both in roster and style of play that he thinks a competent Bucks coaching staff would go after to help up the odds of Milwaukee getting through. What are the weaknesses in the Pacers, essentially?
Well, I'm thinking you got to worry about the Bucks defense, worrying about the Pacers offense, because I feel like that's your primary goal, is to try and minimize the Pacers offense, because you're probably going to have an easier time scoring on the Pacers defense. And one thing that I'm expecting, especially with the addition of Pat Beverly, is that somebody's going to be in Halliburton's pocket, for the full 94 feet. And we've seen that. There's been a couple things that have hampered Halliburton the most is size, big guys, that can move and with some help keep him somewhat contained, and also just keeping the ball out of his hands as well as possible, and not letting them get the ball inbounds, and and then pitchers often have someone else pull it up. Sometimes it's Siakam, or Nimhart, and then they'll initiate. But that just you know, obviously, also if they're doing that, they're doing it after a make, which is, um, obviously the goal for the Bucks is to get those makes and then be able to um, slow down the Pacers because you know Halliburton's looking up the floor when the ball's in the air, whether it's a make or a miss, and wanting to get the ball and go. And so if the Pacers get a stop and they're off to the races, um, I'm assuming the Bucks will be sending people back early, and that is part of how they've improved in transition. But focusing on what they're doing after this makes and trying to keep the ball out of Halliburton's hands is the best way to keep that pace slower and force the Pacers to generate more half-court offense where, it just is a different game for them.
Right, I throw a quick follow-up here about rebounding. The Pacers rebounding, are they strong? Are they weak? Is that something to keep an eye out for as well?
It fluctuates. I feel like some nights, I felt like Turner had one of his better rebounding nights in that Hawks game. He had, I think, 13, had 31 points, but even after the game, Carlisle was saying, forget the points, how about the rebounds? And Shaq definitely has helped with that, but they're, still, even the backup bigs with Jalen Smith, not, you know, overly great rebounder. So that definitely is not, an area where they excel at all. So they can, but it's just not consistent.
I throw in a small aside here about the Bucks rebounding compared to the Pacers, how I think it's probably an edge for the Bucks given the size differential, especially the rotation that Doc Rivers is probably going to throw out there. So just pointing out that this is probably an area the Bucks should dominate, and that's one large component that could see the Bucks get through. So me just pontificating here about that before going back to Tom too will kind of add on to it.
Yeah, and that's always a big indicator of success or failure with that team is how they're managing and giving not giving up the offensive boards is to the Bucks is also that's a fame that rears its ugly head as well.
Yeah,
I'm gonna ask something a little bit bigger picture. The Pacers haven't made the playoffs since I believe 2019, 2020. And they haven't been in the past the first round, I think, in a decade. So,
Yeah.
given how this season went, what are your expectations for the playoffs this year? Like, what would be, I guess, passable or something to build off of this season?
Yeah, that's a great question because it has kind of changed very recently. I think the goal at the outset of the season was if this team could make the playoffs and literally win a game in the playoffs, first round, a game, not a series, game, because the last two times they were swept. It would just be a good, it would mark a good season and a great step for Halliburton, who's never been in the playoffs. It's like, you got to take these steps to keep developing. And that was, I think at the outset of the season, that was kind of a goal. Well, they ended up, winning more games than expected. They make a move that is kind of a windmill move to picking up Siakam. And then the state of the Eastern Conference. Now, Giannis is hurt. Um, you know, Embiid is game to game. The Knicks are playing great. They're still down a few guys. Everyone, it seems like everyone, other than Boston, has, either youth or health issues or, um, you know, what I'm saying is the opportunity is there to try and think bigger than just, okay, great, we made the playoffs. win a game or two at home, and then get ready for next season. It's like, and I think Carlisle really emphasized this after the game on Sunday when he was being asked, a lot of kind of fluffy questions about, hey, the team made the playoffs, a third year of a rebuild, blah blah. He's like, I don't care that we made the playoffs. We need to seize the moment now and try and go as far as we can. And I think it feels like the opportunity is there. You never know what's going to happen. As these series roll on, we've seen this year after year. Guys get injured. Like Toronto's year, things just fell into place for them, and all of a sudden, they have a title, and so it kind of feels like they're trying to have that mindset of, hey, take care of us, play our best. We're right now, knock on whatever wood, um, pretty healthy. So take advantage of this situation because you may have a better year next year, maybe improve, but then things don't fall your way and you have a bad injury at the wrong time, or you never know what's going to happen. So um, I still think, you know, the success now of the season will depend on how they play in this series. They may lose it, but the the eye test will be there. How are they playing? How are they responding to the various situations? And did they just run up against that? Yeah, obviously experienced veteran Bucks team. I know a lot of people are almost more worried that Giannis is out because this is when the Pacers have their problems. I mean, Bobby Portis will go out for 25, and these guys will rise up and fill a gap, and the Pacers will be like, wait, what happened? There's no Giannis. That feels like what always happens to this team. So I think it's avoiding that situation where there doesn't seem to be a letdown. If they, you can tell when they're playing well, and if they're playing well and they still get beat, then that's one thing. But I still think in a lot of people's minds, the success of the season is still to be determined by how this, at least this initial series goes.
All right, next year I tried to bait Tom to declare that the Pacers fans were really hoping they were going to face the Bucks, that the 4 wins out of 5 games during the regular season have them feeling a certain level of confidence, and that ultimately when it came down to the multitude of playoff matchups they could have had in the final 2 weeks of the season, the Bucks were always the team they wanted because they know they're going to stomp us. Tom didn't take the bait. He was gracious, but he did talk a little bit about how the regular season, how much does it weigh in? Does it really matter? Is it going to mean much once these two teams kind of face off? So just wanted to ask Tom here, were the Bucks the ideal first round playoff opponent for the Pacers in his mind?
And I mean, it literally could have been any of those 4 right up
Yeah.
to the last half of the last game. It was unbelievable. I think, probably a preference would have been Cleveland. It looked like they were going to be playing Cleveland for quite a while. And or Orlando. Orlando is not a great matchup for the Pacers, but they're full of youth and inexperience as well.
Right.
And the last game between those two teams was good. Would have been a good series. And the thing with the Bucks is just like, we've seen all these guys excel at a high level at this time of year. And it's same like when you talk about the Heat, it's like they have so much experience to draw on, and that unless they have an injured Jimmy Butler and all that, they're not going to go out without a crazy fight. So that's why I feel like the series with the Bucks is like, with or without Giannis, is going to be a battle and will really be a great experience for not only Halliburton but a lot of these young guys who haven't had the playoff minutes other than Siakam really, and you know not a huge fan. I love it for the theater, obviously, because of
Right.
the earlier games and all the stuff that went on. It's going to be fun, but it's going to be, one of those things that's excruciating to watch. And, a lot of times these things have come down to how the refereed or who, all these little things that pop up. But it seems like both these teams will be ready to go at each other, which will make it fun.
You mentioned the theater of this matchup during the season. One of the questions on here: what did kind of the Pacers community make of Ballgate? Because I know that it was Game Ballgate. Forgive me, because I knew it was a very active night, passionate night.
Oh yeah,
in the Blue Hoop Discord. So I want to hear kind of the opposing take on that.
I think. I mean, speaking for myself, and I think most people felt like it was hilarious, and so just the emotion behind it, and then feeling like I know from the team's perspective, once the dust settled, they felt nothing was done. Nothing was done on their end. It was just a big misunderstanding. But they had to give Oscar Sheway some kind of game ball for his points. So, which I think they just did that. They had a G League guy come up at the end of the year, and of course he got his points, so they gave him a game ball. But I don't know. I thought there was so much going on after that game, and I think from the Pacers' perspective, fans' perspective, it was just high comedy and entertainment. I mean, it's one of those things in the NBA. There's so many characters. There's so many things that happen throughout the year, and those things are just hilarious to look back on now, and see how it all played out. But I don't think it'd be interesting to see if anyone brings that up. I'm sure they will at some point after every game, but it'll be interesting to see how it's handled going forward.
It might get a moment in the presser. The series might determine how that moment kind of affects the rivalry going forward. It could be a multi-year thing. How does Giannis impact Oscar Tshiebwe's legacy?
Exactly.
I blithely assert here that the pre-game cinematics will include various shots of Game Ball Gate footage of all the chaos after the fact. So just a little joke here about Game Ball Gate before Tom continues.
Real quick, just on that though, I think one thing, we talked about how the Pacers haven't been in the playoffs. They're kind of in a rebuild. Mm-hmm. There's been not a lot of great times to glom onto. And one thing that's been awesome over the years with the Pacers, some insane rivalries with the Knicks. Also, a little bit with Chicago, but and then the LeBron years with the Heat and the Eastern Conference Finals, those rivalries. And it just felt like, hey, we got something budding here with Milwaukee, and it feels like, yes, let's get back into it, and have a good rivalry, especially when teams within the division, when you play each other so often during the regular season, and then to have this playoff series pop up in round one is like perfect. And again, how that rivalry builds will definitely be shaped by how these games go. If there's a sweep or something, might be enough of that. But if there's some good battles, and I mean, come on, you got Pat Bev in the mix now. There's going to be some action. So it's going to be fun to see if the Pacers can rise up to that challenge from those vets, because they're going to be doing everything they can from a gamesmanship standpoint, I would imagine, to try and get an advantage.
I assert here that this game will go down as the game ball gate decider. Whichever team comes away victorious in the final game, Adam Silver will come out and hand the game ball finally to whoever is most deserving of it. I then jump into one last player analysis ask of Tom. It's of TJ McConnell, proverbial buck killer. Ran through a couple of his stats in the lead up to it. I believe he averaged close to a double-double in points and assists in 3 of his last 5 seasons with the Pacers against the Bucks. So the numbers look great. I was just curious, is it a figment of our imagination, or is it something that Tom has noticed as well in watching the team over the years against the Bucks?
I mean, honestly, I really hadn't realized that to that extent. But now that you mention it, I mean, I think you might be onto something.
Okay, great.
What was that? I mean, didn't he have the that monster first half last year, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
Yes, which obviously boosted that. He ended up with like 30 points or 29 points, I think, but almost all of it was in the first half. But that is good to know, and he's been playing consistently at that buck killer level over the last month. So hopefully he can maintain that. And maybe he just, likes the five-star forum gym up there. I don't know. Yeah, that was, and he lets everybody know when he makes a shot. So,
So he's extra aggravating for fans at home too. Like,
yeah,
this sucks.
yeah,
This really sucks.
But honestly, he's been so fun to watch of late. I mean, his ability to get the ball into the lane and then just create off of that has been incredible. And he's got the little pogo stick jumper that no matter what the size of the guys in there, they don't seem to be able to time him up. And he's just been money with that of late. And then also, he'll get people thinking about a shot, and then he's throwing a lob to Obi Toppin. So definitely a critical piece of any success the Pacers are going to have. And so hopefully he can maintain that buck killer mentality.
Yeah.
And I think we went over a pretty kind of good overview of what to expect going into the weekend and the series. I feel pretty good about what we've covered.
Wanted to give the floor over here to Tom for him to ask any questions he would have of us, of the Bucks, to return the favor in kind for what he was doing for us last night.
I'm assuming Giannis is going to play still. So, but I obviously the other big issue with the Bucks is Damian Lillard, his health, his play of late, and I know it seems like there's all kinds of noise out there around him, but how do you feel he's playing heading into the playoffs, and will this week off be for those veteran guys? I'm sure this week off is going to be nothing but good.
The highs are great. I feel like right after the All-Star break, there was a gap where it was like he kind of settled back in, and it felt like that was the Dame that we were about to get. And since then, it's kind of reverted back to the way it was before the All-Star break. And I mean, the injury to Giannis doesn't really help things. I'd say I'm kind of at like a C+ in confidence, especially without Giannis going into the playoffs. But I'm not. I still think Dame is Dame, but it's not. He's not. I feel like this year has kind of just showed that night to night throughout an 82 game season, he's not in his prime anymore in all of its glory, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if he is like gonna have to step up and be the first option, I don't know if he can command the O in a shootout north of 130 like we're capable of maybe seeing this week.
I jump in here to give my own thoughts on Dame in particular in the context of Tom's question, essentially agreeing with Michael that a C+ or passing, but probably less than expected grade for Dame is accurate. The issue that I talk about here that's obviously getting cut is we had that switch at the end of the season from Malik Beasley to Patrick Beverley in the starting lineup. And for the Pacers, they would have only seen the Dame Malik pairing, which, we talked about throughout the year on the podcast. You would read it in articles from the national media. That duo in particular, opposing guards, were just tearing apart. And part of that was the team defense, and part of it was just those two guys as defensive players or non-defensive players. So I jumped in to essentially say, agree with Michael. I still have faith that Dame could up it because he's going to have to. There's literally no choice. I think there's an upside to Giannis being gone in that there will be no question for Dame of who is going to have to be the primary creator and scorer. He's done pretty well throughout the season when Giannis sat and he played. So I was still hopeful. We have enough big men to get him free, et cetera, et cetera. And the X factor of Patrick Beverley being out there to hopefully anchor it, the perimeter defense in particular a little bit, should be enough to help get the team through.
One other thing, real quick, another difference, I guess, was from those earlier games was Jay Crowder was not available. And I'm thinking, and part of me think, I don't know why I have treat Bobby Portis like a boogeyman. I just feel like he's played well against the Pacers, and I actually, he was in the same draft as Myles Turner, and I was really high on him that year. They ended up taking Turner, but so I've always kind of followed him. But I think Crowder might be a better option if Giannis is out on Siakam. But I'm not. I'm also kind of thinking of Crowder over the past 6-7 years, and I'm not sure where he's at right now. Coming, not playing the full year, and he's definitely a veteran, has some miles on him. Do you think he would be better on that, or do you think they'll go with Portis, or how do you think they'll manage that?
I would get my thoughts in on the Jay versus Bobby debate here before Michael did. So it boils down to, my take is Jay is old and decrepit, but he's a million times the defender that Bobby Portis is, even when he is old and decrepit, if only because Jay's greatest weakness defensively these days are if the opposing team can force him into a straight line drive, have to force him to defend that way. Whereas he has the size and the ability to move and at least maintain contact laterally, to not stay in front of a Siakam type, but to move him from side to side and not get totally beat there. So my idea here was, don't worry about Bobby becoming a starter, because that's just not something that happens all that often outside of extreme injury cases. Jay's going to be the go-to. He's going to be the reliable option defensively, which is what Doc is going to go preference in this situation. So those are my thoughts on Jay Crowder here.
Yeah, I always feel like he excels as a defender on the ground. He's not, he's just stout and able to clog things up. So, and that will definitely be a benefit and something that they were missing earlier.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head too, comparing like last year to this year. I mean, I think he's one of those guys where his mood and kind of what's going on between the ears is like a big kind of focal point into how he plays and the energy that he plays with. But even so, I think the idea of Jay Crowder is a little bit better than that, the reality of having Jay Crowder, especially in your starting lineup, at least at this point in his career.
Yeah.
And now we have finally made it to the end of the podcast. We go to series predictions. We start with Tom, go to Michael, then me.
All right. I think there's the way things are laying right now, with all this time off, get everybody healthy. Pacers in 6. I mean, come on.
Ooh. I was mulling over this on my drive home tonight from work, and I can't, in good faith, I have to say what's on my mind.
No.
7. I'm sorry. I think Indy. I just, from what I saw in those 5 games this year, I think I hope I'm wrong, but I saw Pacers in 7.
So having heard the shock reveal that Michael was going to back the Pacers in 7, I'm not holding it against you, Michael, but it did go there. Obviously, we couldn't have both Bucks hosts pick the Pacers in this, so I ended up going for Bucks in 7. I do believe it. It's not just to get the difference in opinion here. I think there's enough veteran moxie, and I said in the cutout portion now that I think it's easy for fans to forget how much of playoff basketball and each individual series is like trench warfare. It's such a grind. And for a team like the Pacers, yes, they have athleticism and youth, but when you hit that first wall in the series and you start doing the first couple of corrections, I mean, you're seeing these guys game after game after game. I'm going to back the Bucks off of veteran experience. I believe in Dame and Chris Middleton, and the size and the guys all around those two main players, even in Giannis's absence, to get it through. And if it comes late and, it's still kind of in the balance, maybe Giannis comes back and saves the day. So Bucks in 7 for me was my prediction. I go on then to say, essentially thanks to Tom. Encourage everybody listening to this to go to indycornrows.com. It's a Substack page now, but they did great work when they were under SB Nation. They continue to do great work now. So I wanted to give a shout out to them. If you're looking for the preview from a Pacers perspective, that's where you should go. Highly encourage. And then I asked Tom any other places that he can have his work found.
Primarily on the Substack at IndyCornrows.com, and then just on Twitter at Indy Cornrows. Really looking forward to this series and appreciate you guys having me on. It should be a fun one.
And now we are at the official end of the podcast. Thank you again for dealing with the technical difficulties. I did my best to clean it up. I appreciate your patience. We plugged everything that you can find on Brew Hoop like we do at the end of every podcast. Game coverage pre, during, post. We have the Monday morning media roundup, Wednesday weekly wrap up. We're going to continue to, on the podcast, try and do a couple more instant reactions as the games finish. So you're not going to hear from us only on a weekly basis as the playoffs go on. The best that we can do, we're going to get 1 to 2 of us for each game to do 15 to 20 minutes immediately after the game ends. Record our thoughts, share it out here. Again, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you again very soon.